Welcome to the debate. Today, we're diving into a really quite compelling case of trust-based fraud, specifically looking at the Ghazala Din scam. It's significant because people like Sahiba from Preston lost substantial amounts, like $8,000, investing in, frankly, unspecified houses. So the real question for us is, what primarily drove this scam's success? Was it the, let's say, structural exploitation of social networks already in place? Or was it more about the targeted psychological and cultural appeals used to build trust? I'm going to argue that the structure, the network, was the primary engine here.
Okay.
I can see the power of that initial hook, definitely, but let me offer maybe a different angle. The defining characteristic for me here is that friend of a friend of a friend model. This structure, I think, was the real innovation. It's what allowed Ghazala Din to stretch her reach geographically. Moving from Birmingham out to cities like Preston, she was basically leveraging these existing social ties to scale it all up, right? And crucially, bypassing the kind of intense scrutiny you'd expect if she had just cold approached someone like Sahiba. So the network itself, not necessarily just personal charm, created this, veneer of a vetted lower risk chance.
That's an interesting way to frame the structure, certainly. But I guess I'd argue that the mechanism, the network, it's kind of useless without the right, let's call it, fuel. I'm just not convinced the reach of the network is the core issue if the initial pitch itself fails, any basic rational test. The source material is pretty clear, isn't it? That the initial buy-in was deeply emotional and cultural. Sahiba explicitly says she trusted the scammer, woman to woman. And she even notes, especially Asian women, you don't really think of conning people. That's powerful stuff. That kind of deep trust, combined with these impossible financial guarantees, promises of doubling, tripling returns, that seems to be the only way she moved forward despite massive red flags. No company name, zero documentation, houses vaguely just described as being in Birmingham.
Right. Okay. I absolutely concede that the initial pitch has to land. It has to be compelling. But the network wasn't just about finding victims, you see. It was designed, I think, to capitalize on these existing trust channels. And crucially, it helped sustain the illusion of legitimacy over time and distance. The fact that Sahiba's own friends had already put money in and were also being scammed, that confirms how effective the pipeline itself was. The kind of collective validation coming through the network, this idea that, this unbelievable deal must be real because others are in. That's what continuously chipped away at the perceived risk across different cities even. The structure, it distributed the credibility, however false. And that's arguably much more potent than just one single appealing lie.
But let's look closely at what that structure was actually distributing. It wasn't just generic credibility. It was distributing a very specific psychological mechanism, one that was tailored to basically switch off financial caution. I mean, the only way someone agrees to hand over $8,000 for, undefined assets with these guaranteed monthly payments and huge end-of-year bonuses, it has to be through successful, personalized manipulation, doesn't it? The scammers maybe genius is the wrong word, but her skill lay in leveraging those specific cultural assumptions, the woman-to-woman trust, to disable the rational brain before the network effect could even kick in. If Sahiba hadn't bought into that cultural appeal, if she hadn't believed the source was inherently trustworthy, the network would have just stopped right there, at her node. That initial breach of trust feels like the absolute necessary condition.
Okay, I agree the cultural leverage was the key, the entry point. But we also need to look at the scammer's efficiency, the operational side. The structural advantage is that the network dramatically lowers the cost and risk for the scammer. Ghazala Din didn't need to personally build that deep, specific trust with every single investor down the line. She established it with a few key nodes, and then the friend of a friend architecture did the heavy lifting. It maintained her distance, distributed the fraudulent promises across geographical lines. It's the network, I think, that let her manage this complexity remotely and, frankly, evade detection for quite some time.
Sure, that structural spread is definitely key to the scale of it all. I wouldn't deny that. But isn't it wholly dependent on the depth of that initial psychological breach? The network's power to distribute the lie is surely just a function of how powerfully that lie was first accepted. The money was sent, despite glaring omissions, because that explicit woman-to-woman trust allowed Sahiba to mentally sort of bridge the huge gap between a friend's recommendation and a completely unrealistic 100% financial guarantee. That bridge had to be built first.
Well, the evidence clearly shows the scheme moving from Birmingham outwards, reaching multiple cities. This, for me, proves that the structural architecture using social ties as these decentralized distribution channels was absolutely fundamental to the scheme's durability and its impressive scale.
That's a very compelling argument for the structure, yes. But again, have you considered that the structure's durability might depend entirely on how profound that initial psychological breach was? The cultural trust element successfully established the scammer's almost unassailable credibility, especially concerning those impossible financial promises. Without that foundation, the structure might not have held.
Indeed. It seems clear that both factors are really strongly at play here. You have the exploitation of social proximity through the network and also that very personalized manipulation of cultural trust. It really demonstrates, I think, that effective fraud often requires quite a sophisticated, multifaceted approach, hitting both the structural scalability and the deep psychological vulnerabilities.